All right, good morning, assessment and evaluation and exercise science class. This is a recap of day one because I felt like I didn't really cover the key points strongly enough, or didn't get I didn't communicate them as well as I probably should have. So I made this little video. Don't expect it every time, but this is to go back over the key points that I may have glanced over or even left out of yesterday's lecture. All right, so what we covered was the syllabus overview for those who were actually attending the class for the first time, and considerations for designing assessments. We went into detail about what PTs might look for versus what strength coaches might look for, the importance of pre-screening, and I'll talk about that in a second, and Lab 1 was assigned, which was the pre-assessment screening. Make sure you fill that out on page 17 and 18 of the 4th edition. If you have the older text, I think it's page 21 or 22, but it was the pre-assessment screening. Make sure you fill that out and turn it in next class period, which I believe is September 24th or September 4th. All right, so we started by vaguely defining physical fitness as a set of attributes or characteristics that people have or achieve that relate to the ability to perform physical activity. So it's just your general definition as far as the class is concerned, so make sure you understand that definition for the purpose of this class. Now, we also talked about the difference between health-related and skill-related physical fitness, and there isn't actually a very good chart in your book, so all I want you to make sure that you know is the difference between the two, which is in these two boxes. So if you can tell me which is which between these two boxes, you'll do well. And also think about applying this to your field. For example, skill-related fitness tests might include specialized components such as agility, speed, power, balance, coordination, and reaction time, whereas health-related components of physical fitness might be those specific components of physical fitness that have a relationship to good health. So BMI or body composition might be more of a health-related physical fitness component, whereas a anaerobic power via a vertical jump might be more skill-related or sports-specific related. Understand the difference between the two. All right, fundamental principles of the assessment. Now, any assessment that you give should include these bulleted points and concepts. The assessment should give a purpose and direction for the programming. All right, it should be well understood by both the participant and the professional. Remember this bulleted list. You might be tested on it. Assessment procedures vary based on the context. So physical therapists might have a different assessment strategy for specific populations than, say, a strength and conditioning coach. The assessments might be very different. Assessments are an integral part of exercise prescription, meaning that if we were to prescribe exercise without first running an assessment, we're really shooting in the dark. Make sure that the assessment is a foundational part of exercise prescription. Consider inter-tester reliability. I don't think we actually touched on this in class, but consider the fact that if a athlete is coming to you, for example, to get his 40 time tested, and the last coach said he ran a 4.5, but you timed him at a 4.4, that might be inter-tester differences, not differences in the speed of the athlete. All right, especially if it's hand timed anyway. So consider that. Also consider body composition. If you get one person to measure your body composition, you should have that person always measure your body composition if you can, because somebody else might measure your body composition slightly differently. And assessments should be valid, meaning they should test what they are meant to test. So if we're trying to test speed in an athlete, we have specific tests for that. All right, well, you're not testing. If you're trying to test speed, don't take them through a vertical jump test, because that's not going to be a good valid test of speed. Another example to show you how gray it might get and that it's not so cut and dry could be a 1RM versus a 6RM versus a 10RM. An example I gave in my other class was if you were to take a bodybuilder and then test their 1RM, that might not be a very valid test of their muscular strength because they've never trained for that 1RM. They train with a 6 to 10 rep range, so they might be a better test for them might be a 6RM because they're conditioned for that particular test. All right, consider equipment calibration. If you have a scale, obviously from time to time they need to be calibrated. And consider that some tests may be repeated multiple times, allowing the tester to average the results, such as in body composition measurements, or allow for a learning curve, such as in a vertical jump or 1RM. So as you'll see as the semester goes on, when we talk about body comp testing, you'll measure each site, each skin fold 3 times, and you'll take the average of whatever those numbers were. Now, for a vertical jump or 1RM, we might have that athlete test 2 or 3 times on that apparatus at that vertical jump or at that 1RM to make sure we get their best result. And then we actually don't take the average of those, we take the best result of those 3, because there might be a learning curve there for that athlete. They may have never performed a vertical jump before, or maybe they've never performed a 1RM. Consider pre-test instructions. Include them 24 hours or more prior to testing. Before you test an athlete or a client, give them 24-hour notice of what they're supposed to wear, what type of test you're going to be performing, whether or not they should eat, all these different things that they might want to consider. Even if you don't tell them certain aspects, like what they should wear, at least they have a good understanding of what the test is going to entail, so they can then schedule everything else around that. Consider equipment and facility conditions. So if you're going to test an athlete, for example, say if you want to test an athlete's aerobic capacity at altitude, their aerobic capacity is going to be much lower than if you were to test them at sea level. So their aerobic capacity in Colorado might be scored at a certain VO2 max, but down at sea level they might have a much higher VO2 max or aerobic power. So consider the facility conditions and such, and consider cold and heat as well. All right, pre-assessment screening. Now, we also talked about, in lengthy detail, pre-assessment screening, running through the informed consent with the client, and then taking them through a health history questionnaire, which you all did, and that's actually your first lab, to find out their family history and everything else that you might need to know to see if there are any contraindications for exercise testing, because some exercise testing requires maximal effort. And if that person has an event, while a cardiovascular event, say they have a heart attack, while you're running them through that graded exercise test, but you didn't run a health history questionnaire, that could leave you liable. So the 9 components of an informed consent, you might go ahead and write these down. You might very well be tested on this. Make sure that that your informed consent has at least these 9 components. The purpose of whatever it is that you're running, of the assessment and such. The procedures that you're going to go through. Any risks or discomforts the participant might encounter. The benefits of the test. Remind them why they're doing the test. Describe any alternatives if applicable. So if the client is not necessarily keen on doing a certain type of test, like for example a body composition skin fold measurement, do you have an alternative for that person? If they don't feel comfortable running through skin fold, they may be able to do they may be able to test their body composition via a different device, like a handheld device or a scale that they stand on that can read their body composition that way. Also discuss any responsibilities of the participant, making sure obviously they get there on time, run through their diet strategies. You don't want to test an athlete on muscular endurance if they haven't eaten all day, for example. Encourage questions. That's another reason you actually tell them about what the test entails 24 hours prior to the test. All right, encourage questions. Make them ask you at least 1 or 2 questions. Explain how data will be handled. Who will see the data? Will it be entered into any files that may be left handy to an office or a coaching staff? Because they might not want some of this information getting around. And make it known that the participant can withdraw at any time. Make sure that you know all of these 9 components of the informed consent, and that you have at least these 9 components in any of the informed consents that you might hand out one day. All right, in your health history questionnaire, you're looking for contraindications to exercise testing and cardiovascular disease risk factors, signs and or symptoms of cardiopulmonary disease, and medications that you might want to consider. All of these are very important. And medications meaning if they take, for example, if they're type 2 diabetic and they take medication for their blood glucose, you'll need to consider that before taking them through an extreme test or a maximal effort test. Same thing if they're on beta blockers. That may affect the way that you get a target heart rate. So you want to consider those medications. You want to consider any signs or symptoms of diseases. And also you'll want to track their risk factors. Go over that in just a second. Oh, well, here it is. All right, good. So we're almost done. You want to memorize this chart because you might very well be tested on it. Okay? And tell me if the client, or if I were to ask you if the client presented one risk factor that he showed symptoms of, would that client be ready for a maximal exercise test? Obviously, the answer is no, because he's a high-risk symptomatic or known cardiovascular disease. You see, as that chart demonstrates, as you work your way down, you actually recommend a medical exam before the exercise testing, and you'll also want to make sure that a physician or registered clinical exercise physiologist in a controlled setting supervises the test, as you'll see in that last box there. So if you are not a physician or a registered clinical exercise physiologist working in a hospital or a laboratory setting, you'll want to refer this guy out. All right? And that chart is on page 22 of the 4th edition. I don't know what page it's on the 3rd edition. But make sure you look at that chart and look at the information below that chart that goes into describing exactly what moderate exercise is and what vigorous exercise is. All right, in Lab 1, again, remember, I've said this now in class and on this video twice. Make sure that you do your pre-assessment screening. It's either on page 17 18 of the 4th edition, or I'm not sure of the page in the 3rd edition, but it's in there. Make sure you do the pre-assessment screening and bring it into class. You don't have to tear it out of your book. You can fill it in your book, or you can scan it onto a document, print that out, and then fill that out and turn it in. All I'm going to do is check it off to see that you've done it, and then hand it back to you. I'm not even going to keep it. That's for you. So make sure you do that, and then you hand it in next week, September 4th. If you cannot make it to class, scan it and email it to me. So please make sure that you complete that assignment. All right, here's your reference. All right, that's all I got. I'll see y'all next week.